You're scrolling Instagram. It's a Tuesday night. You're on the couch, decompressing after work. And you see it. Your coworker, the one who's always complaining about being broke, who borrows lunch money sometimes, just posted a photo of new AirPods Max, $550. The caption is something about treating yourself. And there's this moment where you're confused. Not judgmental, just genuinely confused. You know they're struggling. You know they have credit card debt. You've heard them stress about rent, but they just dropped $550 on headphones. And then you keep scrolling, and you see it again. Someone with a brand new iPhone. Someone else with designer sneakers. People who you know for a fact are living paycheck to paycheck, buying things that cost more than their monthly discretionary budget. And there's this question that keeps nagging at you. Why? Why would someone who can't afford rent buy luxury items? It doesn't make sense. Except it does, in a way that's uncomfortable to examine too closely. My name's Peter, and if you've ever wondered why people who are financially struggling still buy expensive things, or if you've done it yourself and felt guilty about it, make sure you hit that subscribe button, because the psychology here isn't about being irresponsible. It's about something much more complicated and much more human. So let's start with what actually happens financially when someone who's broke buys a luxury item. You're making $48,000 a year. After taxes, that's about $3,100 a month take home. Rent is $1,350. Car payment $380. Insurance $160. Student loans $290. Groceries $320. Utilities and phone $170. Gas $110. That's $2,780. You've got $320 left for the entire month. That $320 is supposed to cover everything else. Clothes when you need them, toiletries, any social life whatsoever, any unexpected expense, anything that makes life feel like more than just survival. And you see those AirPods Max, $550. You can't afford them. The math is clear, but you can finance them, $50 a month for 12 months through a firm. And suddenly $550 becomes $50, and $50 feels manageable. Uncomfortable, but manageable. So you do it. You finance the headphones. And now you've got $270 left instead of $320. But you've got the headphones. And for about a week, maybe two, they make you feel different. Not wealthier, just less broke. Like you're participating in normal life instead of just watching other people participate. Then the feeling fades. The headphones are just headphones. And you've got $50 less per month for the next year. And when an unexpected car repair comes up 3 months later, you don't have the $270 cushion you used to have. You've got $220. And that $50 difference is the difference between covering it and going into credit card debt. That's the financial reality, but that's not why people do it.
Most people think broke people buy luxury items because they're bad with money, because they don't understand math, because they're impulsive or irresponsible. That's not it. Here's what's actually happening. And this is uncomfortable but true. When you're financially struggling, when you're living paycheck to paycheck, when you're always stressed about money, when you're doing mental math in the grocery store, you are carrying this constant low-grade psychological weight. It's not dramatic. It's not a crisis. It's just this persistent feeling of being behind, of not having enough, of being less than. And that feeling is exhausting. Not the kind of exhaustion that a vacation fixes. The kind that lives in your body, in your shoulders, in the back of your mind. Now, most people don't want to feel this way, obviously. So they develop coping mechanisms. Ways to temporarily relieve that pressure. And one of the most effective short-term coping mechanisms is consumption. Buying something that signals to yourself, to others, that you're not as broke as you feel. This is called compensatory consumption. You're compensating for the psychological feeling of scarcity by purchasing something that creates a temporary feeling of abundance. The $550 headphones aren't about sound quality. They're about the 15 minutes you spend in the Apple Store or clicking through the website, feeling like a person who can afford nice things. They're about the moment you unbox them, the moment you post the photo, the moment someone comments nice, and you feel, briefly, like you're doing okay. It's not rational in a financial spreadsheet sense, but it's deeply rational in a psychological survival sense. You're not buying headphones. You're buying a brief escape from the constant feeling of scarcity. And here's the thing that makes this mechanism particularly powerful. It works. Not long-term, but in the moment, it absolutely works. For a few hours, maybe a few days, you genuinely feel different. The purchase creates a dopamine hit, a feeling of agency, a sense that you're in control of something. The fact that it's expensive is actually part of the appeal. If you bought a $30 item, it wouldn't create the same psychological effect. The expensive thing signals to your brain, you just did something that broke people can't do. Therefore, you're not broke. Except you are. And the item doesn't change that. But your brain doesn't care about next month. Your brain cares about right now. And right now, you feel better.
There's another layer to this that's even more uncomfortable to examine. It's called social signaling, and it's one of the most powerful forces in human behavior, even though most people don't consciously recognize it. Here's how it works. You go to work every day, you sit in meetings with people who make more than you, who dress better than you, who have newer phones, nicer cars, better everything, and you're aware of it. Not in a jealous way necessarily, just aware. You're aware that you look like the person who can't afford things. And that awareness creates social anxiety. Not the clinical kind, just the normal human discomfort of being obviously lower status in a social environment, of being the person who brings lunch from home while everyone else orders delivery, the person with the cracked phone screen while everyone else has the latest model. So you buy the headphones, or the sneakers, or the phone, and suddenly you have one visible signal that you're not at the bottom. One thing that says, I belong here too. It doesn't fix your financial situation, but it temporarily relieves the social anxiety of being visibly broke. And here's the part that's hard to admit. That relief is valuable. It might be financially irrational, but it's psychologically rational. The social cost of being visibly broke, the judgment, the exclusion, the way people treat you differently, that's real. And spending $550 to temporarily mitigate that cost can feel worth it, even when the math doesn't support it. This is why telling someone who's broke to just stop buying expensive things doesn't work. You're not addressing the psychological mechanism driving the behavior. You're treating the symptom, not the cause. The cause is the constant psychological pressure of financial scarcity combined with the social pressure of being visibly less than in everyday environments. Let's talk about what this actually costs over time. Not just the $550, the real cost. You finance those headphones, $50 a month for 12 months. But because you're now $50 shorter every month, when unexpected expenses come up, and they always come up, you don't have the buffer, so you use a credit card. Over the next year, you put about $800 on credit cards for things that would have been covered by your normal monthly discretionary if you hadn't been paying $50 for the headphones. That $800 accrues interest at 19% APR. After a year, it's $950. After 2 years, if you're only making minimum payments, it's over $1,100. So the $550 headphones actually cost you closer to $1,700 when you factor in the cascade of financial decisions that resulted from having $50 less per month. But it gets worse, because now you're carrying credit card debt, which creates more financial stress, which creates more psychological pressure, which makes you more likely to make another compensatory purchase to relieve that pressure, and the cycle reinforces itself. This is called the broke spending trap. You're broke, so you feel psychologically awful, so you spend money to feel temporarily better, which makes you more broke, which makes you feel worse, which makes you more likely to spend again. The mechanism is self-reinforcing, and it's very, very hard to break out of once you're in it.
You're lying in bed. It's 3 a.m. You're staring at the ceiling doing math again. The credit card balance is $3,200. The minimum payment is $95. Your monthly discretionary is already down to $270 after the headphone payment and everything else. You're thinking about those headphones. You barely use them anymore. The novelty wore off. They're just headphones, but you're still paying for them, and they triggered a cascade that put you deeper in debt. And that tightness in your chest, it's not guilt exactly. It's more like this quiet realization that the thing you bought to make yourself feel less broke actually made you more broke, and you knew that when you bought them. You knew it wouldn't fix anything, but you bought them anyway because the psychological relief felt necessary in that moment. That's the trap. The relief is real, but it's temporary. The cost is real, and it's permanent. Now here's where it gets really complicated, because I'm not going to tell you that broke people should never buy anything nice. That's not realistic, and it's not human. The problem isn't occasional discretionary spending. The problem is using luxury purchases as a psychological coping mechanism for financial stress.
When you're buying expensive things not because you want them, but because you need the temporary relief from feeling broke, that's when it becomes a trap. So how do people who are financially stressed break out of this pattern? Not by willpower, not by just deciding to stop buying things. That doesn't work. What works is addressing this psychological mechanism directly, recognizing what the purchase is actually for, seeing it clearly. When they're tempted to buy something expensive they can't afford, they pause and ask, am I buying this because I want it, or because I want to not feel broke for a few hours? If the answer is the second one, they don't buy it, not because they're disciplined, but because they've recognized that the relief is temporary and the cost is real. They've seen the pattern clearly enough that their brain stops treating compensatory consumption as a solution. And here's what they do instead. They find cheaper ways to address the psychological pressure. They take a walk. They call a friend. They watch something. They do literally anything that provides temporary relief without permanent financial cost. Is it as effective as buying something? No. Honestly, no. The dopamine hit from consumption is real and it's powerful, but it doesn't create a cascade of debt. It doesn't make next month harder. They also work on the social signaling piece. Instead of trying to signal status through expensive visible items, they get comfortable being the person with the older phone, the worn clothes, the used car. They stop trying to hide being broke and start accepting it as a temporary state they're working to change. That's hard. It requires letting go of the social anxiety. It requires being okay with being visibly lower status in social environments. But it also eliminates the psychological pressure that drives compensatory consumption. Here's the part nobody wants to hear. If you're broke and you're buying luxury items to cope with feeling broke, you're not weak, you're not stupid, you're not irresponsible. You're human. The system you're living in creates constant psychological pressure. It bombards you with marketing designed to make you feel inadequate. It puts you in social environments where your lower economic status is visible and stigmatized. It offers you easy financing that makes irrational purchases feel manageable. And then it judges you for responding to that pressure in the most natural human way possible, seeking temporary relief. But understanding the mechanism doesn't make it okay, because the mechanism is a trap. It's keeping you broke while making you feel momentarily less broke, and that's not a sustainable pattern. Breaking out requires seeing it clearly, recognizing when you're about to make a compensatory purchase, acknowledging the psychological need without acting on it in a way that makes your financial situation worse. It's not about willpower, it's about awareness. And once you see the pattern clearly enough, it becomes much harder to fall into it. Let me tell you what changes when you stop using purchases to cope with financial stress. You stop carrying the guilt. Every time you bought something you couldn't afford, there was guilt after the temporary relief wore off. And that guilt was its own psychological weight. When you stop the pattern, that weight lifts. You start making progress, not because you suddenly have more money, but because you stop making decisions that actively make your situation worse. The cascade stops, the debt stops growing, and slowly, incrementally, you start building a small buffer. And that buffer, even a small one, even just $500 or $800, it changes your psychology more than any luxury purchase ever could. Because it's real security, not temporary relief. It's actual progress, not the illusion of progress. But here's the reality check. None of this is sexy. It's not a life hack. It's not a quick fix. It's the slow, unglamorous work of recognizing psychological patterns and choosing different responses. Nobody's going to congratulate you for not buying headphones. There's no viral moment in saying, I didn't make a compensatory purchase today. It's boring, it's internal, it's invisible. But it works. And after 6 months, a year, 2 years of not falling into the trap, you look at your financial situation and it's actually measurably better. Not because you earned more, because you stopped using spending as a coping mechanism. So here's the thing about why broke people buy luxury items. It's not about financial literacy. It's not about discipline. It's about psychological mechanisms responding to real pressures in ways that provide temporary relief at permanent cost. The luxury item isn't the problem. The psychological need it's trying to address is the problem. And until you recognize that need and find other ways to address it, the pattern continues. You can't willpower your way out of a psychological trap. You can only see it clearly enough that it stops working. And once you see it, really see it, the expensive purchase stops looking like relief and starts looking like what it actually is, a short-term escape that makes the long-term situation worse. That clarity doesn't make being broke easier, but it stops you from making it harder.